Welcome back again. So today it's a pleasure to be back again to talk to you. And this year, as I talked about it, is about making advances and looking at how do we continue the conversation that we've started. So last week when I had the conversation, it was about real world data, the potential use, and what advances are happening in that space on what we can do. Today, on further reflection and actually further studies on the same topic, one of the key things that I've been asking myself is who are the people who are guiding the conversation on the use of real world data and real world evidence, but at the same time, who are the people who actually have greater stake in terms of driving that conversation? What can they do, and how can that work better for us? So starting point is to just understand that real world data or real world evidence is about the emerging evidence on how a product is either effective or ineffective in care delivery to patients. If I get product A, let's say a medicine that is being used in a particular population of patients, then at the end of the day I need to confirm whether it's effective or not effective in their care, and whether there are any changes that can be adopted. And it also, if that medicine has been used in the management of one disease, is there probable use in other areas of practice? And those are key things that we need to generate from that evidence that is correlated. But at the same time, the other bit we need to look at and acknowledge is the fact that when we're talking about data and evidence in healthcare practice, is about looking at, is that going to ensure that we have safe, effective, and quality medicine? That is the first pillar, so that the medicines are available, they are safe and they're effective and quality ones. Then beyond that medicine being safe, effective, and the right quality, then we need to see, is it accessible to the patients who are need it? So that accessibility would be from a regulatory standpoint. Is it being registered in that country? What are the requirements for registration? What is the supporting data that is needed for it to be registered? Then once it's been registered, how expensive or how affordable is it to the patient? That is the cost optimization factor that need to be looked into. Then once we address that, then the other bit that we need to ask ourselves, do we have the right healthcare system that will ensure that that product, if it's the right quality as we had looked at in the first phase, it's made accessible through the regulatory and regulatory limitations and all the requirements, then now we have a health system that is able to deliver it. Let's say, for example, we're talking about precision medicine. The product is supposed to be injected into a particular tissue in your body, and it actually has to act at that particular cell or gene, whatever it is. Do we have the infrastructure to make that kind of medicine delivery possible? If we don't have it, then those are limitations that are going to be there. And then even before using a medicine, then there's need for diagnosis. Do we have the right diagnostic framework and instruments that can ensure that that is now going to be happening? Because if we have a medicine, then we need to be able to diagnose and see that it can be used in that patient population. So these are some of the advances and drivers that we need to look at. So when I looked at that, then I asked myself, who are the people who have insight to such kind of information that can ensure that we are optimizing healthcare service delivery? But as we are optimizing this, it's ensuring that we have an overarching healthcare system that is optimally designed and going to make use of the available clinical data, clinical information that is emerging and being made available. And that clinical data, clinical evidence is what we are referring to as real world data or real world evidence, because it's not in a clinical trial setting, but rather in a patient population that are actually ideal to be using that kind of care. So it's in real life cases that we're dealing with. So on that perspective, then the key people that we need to know actually are in this space are healthcare professionals, from the community healthcare worker or community healthcare volunteer, to the physician that are seeing patients, to the medical specialist, to the pharmacist, the nurse, the radiographer, the physiotherapist. All these healthcare providers are interacting with the patient at one point in this healthcare cycle, and as they're interacting with them, they're either providing or recommending an intervention, and in so doing, they're able to generate evidence by interacting with the real patient who gives them that information. So those are critical things that we have to acknowledge. And on that account, then we need to ask ourselves, who are the people and what role do these people have to play? Who are the people driving the conversation on real world evidence and real world data? What role do healthcare providers and healthcare practitioners have to play in these discussions and discuss on real world evidence and real world data? In my perspective, I believe as healthcare professionals who are interacting with patients, we have the greatest stake in actually generating and optimizing the use of this data, because we understand the context within which we are working, we understand the patient that we are dealing with, and we have the one-on-one touch, the primary contact with them, to be able to generate and actually collect these insights. And that is a gap that we're seeing, in the sense that currently when we look at the real world data, real world evidence, we have different third-party companies and organizations that are collecting and actually presenting this data, and this data is being used by the big pharmaceutical companies and whichever corporation that are interested, because they're going to use it either to optimize their diagnostic, to optimize their medicines that are therapies that are coming into the market, using that information. But the question is, what is the blend of where that information is coming, and how do we guarantee that that information, when it's being collected and being presented, is going to be used, and the ultimate outcome and the benefit of that information is going to be experienced and actually utilized by the patient. It can only happen when we have a closed loop integrated information flow, and that closed loop integration information flow can only happen when the healthcare providers who are interacting with the patients are taking leadership and being accountable and driving that conversation on where it needs to be. So for me, the first thing is healthcare practitioners and professionals have to acknowledge they have a place in the real world, generation and use of real world evidence and real world data. Then how do they go about this? It's about looking at this particular area of work where you are. Let's say, for example, you're an oncologist. Whether you're an oncology pharmacist, oncology physician, oncology nurse, whichever space you're working in the oncology department, is to understand that their patient that you're taking care of, they need the medication at the right time in the right doses, as it should be, and in an affordable manner. So the question is, how many of your patients are being treated? How many of them are using a particular medicine, and how many are not using the same medicine, if at all it is the recommended therapeutic agent? And those who are using it, what are the driving factors? Those who are not using it, what are the limitations or actually the barriers to them using that medication? That is evidence that can be collected and presented in a scientific manner, so that it's going to guide in terms of whoever is developing the medicine or whoever is going to optimize this health system or service delivery model to ensure the patients can access it. Then beyond that, we now need to ask ourselves, for those who are using a particular medicines, are they getting better or are they not getting any improvements? And if they are not getting any improvement, then we need to say, how do we ensure they are able to get improvement from the use of this medication? And if they are not, then how can we now change to ensure shift from one medicine to another? And that is going to ensure that we have an effective healthcare system, because at the end of the day, if you're a physician and you've actually generated evidence and data to confirm that the patient is not responding as you had expected or you had hoped for, then the first intervention is, one, stop the use of that medicine and opt for another one. But because it is in terms of our treatment guidelines and standard treatment protocols, then it is your responsibility to actually inform a review of that particular guideline to ensure patients can get a better value by not using a drug that is actually not effective for them. That is the value of real world evidence if we use it the right way that it should be used. So that is already a place that you can apply that kind of information. Then as we generate the data, then one video that I did a while back last year is around documentation. We need to adopt good documentation practices. If it isn't documented, it would never happen. And therefore, the people who are interacting with this information and interacting with patients and interacting with products need to document what medicines were used, what are the different drivers behind their use and not lack thereof, and how do we ensure that patients are getting better outcomes or not getting better outcomes. Document it and report it in a clear way. And documenting in a clear way, one of the key things that we've seen in the discussions around real-world evidence is that we don't have clear endpoints. If, let's say, for example, you're using this one anti-malarial product in treatment of a patient, what is the end point of that care? Is it when there are no malaria parasites are being traced, actually detected in the blood sample, or when the clinical symptoms of malaria have already ended? So what are the key endpoints? And we need to have those in place. And the endpoints are not only from a clinical setting, but also from the social and the economic aspect that we're looking at. When a patient is not able to get the medication, the end point for that would be at that point where they are not able to get care. So what are the drivers that can be put into place? What are the key data points? And then those data points have to be collated and actually synchronized to ensure that from a regulatory standpoint, from a pharmaceutical developer standpoint, and from a healthcare system specialist and also healthcare provider, we understand these are the limitations, these are the perimeter, actually the confines within which we can work. And if that is the case, then how do we ensure that it's working in a positive and robust way? So those are the key things that we need to look at. Then once that information is generated, then we need to see, are we able to analyze it? And when we're talking about the analysis and actual interpretation of this data, it's going to be critical, because the value of data is based on the information that we can generate from it. And we know that healthcare practice is becoming as diverse as possible. For the last 55 videos, I've been talking about different aspects and different areas of work. And in that case, then you need to ask yourself, in which particular segment or faction in the healthcare space are you operating in? What value can such kind of information that is collected and generated be of value to you? And in that case, then, once that information is generated, different healthcare providers and healthcare professionals are in a position to actually contextualize and use that information in informing their practice trends. And when we talk about that is, as, let's say, for example, as a regulatory affairs professional, how can I use that real world evidence that has been generated to ensure that I can inform regulatory decisions? Can liaise with the health authorities to ensure that they're able to make a decision whether to register or not register, to recall a product from the market or to maintain it in the market, to analyze additional safety evidence that is emerging. So how can I use that information? That would be one key bit. Look at it from a financing standpoint. We have health insurance organizations that are depending on the available data and actually knowing how many patients are being taken care of, how many are not responding, how many are responding, so that they're able to actually compensate for quality care in terms of outcome-based remuneration packages and actually rebate services. And in that case, then, the use of that data is guiding economic decision and financing solutions that are going to be developed. As a healthcare provider, if I'm using that data in that case, then I'm able to make an informed guide on how that is going to work. So that is now the use cases. And in the last video that I talked about is the use case, in the sense that where do I want to use this information? What is the expected outcome? And that is where, if we are generating it because we're interacting with the patient, we're interacting with the healthcare system where we're operating, then once we've generated it, also in our own diverse areas of practice, we should be able to analyze and synthesize to generate information that can be put to use. And the next phase is now integrating that information and applying it in the use where it needs to be applied, so that at the end of the day, we know that cascade. And one of the key things as to why I'm doing this is because I believe as healthcare professionals, we have a great stake and we have greater value in being part of this conversation. But unfortunately, we are taking a backseat, and we have to move from that backseat because we have a role to play. And we don't have to be guided on what to do. We need to be proactive and take the conversation to the next frontier. And that is something that I feel we need to do better, and we need to keep working towards. So in that case, then, in generating real-world evidence, you as a practicing professional, read more about real-world evidence and real-world data. Ask yourself, what are the probable use cases? How many patients do you deal with? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And what are the bottlenecks to that kind of an opportunity being harnessed? Then in that case, then move to the next frontier. And if you're able to do that, then I think as healthcare professionals, we'll be on a better trajectory. And the other key thing that I feel we need to take advantage is the fact that we need to shape policies, we need to shape conversations. So if we know these are possibilities, then let's talk out openly and proactively about what advances we're seeing in the industry, what bottlenecks, what challenges we're also seeing in that industry, so that it becomes a continuous conversation and we build more allies. And when we get more allies in the conversation, we're able to shape the direction of that. Then finally, let's champion for policies to be responsive and actually cognizant of these. Let us not be shamed by the fact that I'm a practicing professional. I'm giving my data to the hospital that has employed me without clear metrics on how that should work. That is not clear, because you have a responsibility, and at the same time you have a responsibility to safeguard the interests of the patient. They trust you and they actually confide in you by giving you that information. Are you going to use it to make their care journey and care pathway better, or are you going to let that data be used by somebody else for other interests, or probably might not be for the best value in terms of the value that could generate if your clinical knowledge and clinical interpretation was applied? And that is a critical bit. And in that, as I come to the end of this video, as a healthcare provider with an interest in real-world data and real-world evidence, look at it from this touch point. We're all talking about the fourth industrial revolution. Fourth industrial revolution, everybody's talking about technology, which is good to acknowledge, but the technology is just going to help us either to collect data or to analyze the data. But it's you to determine the use case for that data. It's you to determine how are you going, what kind of information is of relevance. You can collect all the data in the world, but if you don't know, you have a use case and you also don't know what are the key data points, data metrics that you need to inform that decision, you'll never be able to make use of it. So for me, the fourth industrial revolution would be about us being able to use technological platforms and solutions to decipher and generate, decipher, and actually adopt in implementation of new pathways and new solutions that are relying on that data. So you can be a data engineer, look at how to generate that data, whether you're engaging with IT specialists or not, find a way. If you're not able to, be a data scientist. Can you make sense of the data that we are generating, we're analyzing? Then make that generation. Then finally, you can be the implementer of the intervention. And in so doing, then we can form structured partnerships and collaborations that will ensure that healthcare doesn't stop when we see the patient, but healthcare starts and stops when we see the patient and actually make use of the information we get from them. We get from them and use in terms of our collaboration with other stakeholders. Thank you so much for following up on this conversation. Let's keep it going. Let's do the best we can to ensure that we're strengthening our pharmaceutical systems. If you enjoyed this conversation, these discussions, subscribe on the channel. Let's share it with our colleagues and peers. And most importantly, Give me feedback on what you feel we can do better. What can we go into? And if you have a question, please feel free to shoot it my way. Thank you so much, and see you again next Sunday.